Welcome back to Hospitality Reinvented. I'm your host, Doug Radkey, the founder and the principal consultant with KRG Hospitality, an agency that helps new and seasoned bar, restaurant, and boutique hotel operators turn confusion into clarity, pressure into performance, and guesswork into growth. This is episode number 32, and today I want to talk about an exciting but dangerous, often emotional and misunderstood stage in the pre-open sequence, and that is the lease. More specifically, the moment that a founder finds a space and starts believing that, this is it. This is the one. Maybe the street, it feels right. The neighborhood has energy. The broker is telling you there is interest from the landlord now. Maybe there is another group looking at the same property. Maybe there is pressure to move on this fairly quickly. Maybe the landlord wants a decision by the end of this week. And then suddenly everything feels real. The dream is no longer just in a notebook or on a strategy deck or sitting in a folder on your desktop or in your phone. It has an address, and that is powerful. I understand why founders get excited at this stage. I have seen it hundreds of times. The lease feels tangible. It feels validating. It feels as if all of the conversations and all of the dreaming and all of the planning and all of the late nights finally have somewhere to go. But here is the hard truth with this. The lease is not the win. The lease, it is not even the finish line. The lease is not proof that the business is even going to work. What the lease is the moment that the obligation really starts. That is the mindset shift that I want to make in this episode, because too many hospitality founders are treating the lease still as the victory, when in reality, it is just the start of more pressure. It is the moment that the rent clock, it starts to start, and it matters, and timelines begin to matter, and permits begin to matter, and this design decisions begin to matter, and construction pricing, and all of that begins to matter. You have your utilities and mechanical system, landlord letters, legal terms, personal guarantees, insurance, and licensing, and opening capital. That all begins to matter in a very serious way. The lease does not care if you are still trying to figure things out. The meter is now running, right? And that is where a lot of pre-open projects begin to slip away. Not because the founder had a bad idea here, and not because the concept, lacked potential, and not because the broker was wrong or anything like that, not because the landlord was being difficult. It's because the lease happened before the business was ready for the lease. And that is a big distinction. A founder may be emotionally ready to sign. They may even be financially capable of writing that deposit check. But that doesn't always mean that the project is lease ready. And lease readiness is where many, hospitality projects either protect themselves or expose themselves. So let's unpack that a little bit here. In a lot of early stage hospitality projects, the founder, they have an idea, right? Maybe it is a cocktail bar, a brunch concept, a coffee shop, a QSR, a boutique hotel, a social club, a brewery, a food hall, or a hybrid concept with some retail and events, whatever it is. They have a vision. There's usually a lot of passion with that. They may have a brand name now, a mood board, a rough menu, maybe a high-level budget. Then they start looking at spaces. And once they begin looking at spaces, the psychology of all of this starts to change. Now the project starts, orbiting around availability. What spaces are available right now? What can we afford? What looks, cool? What neighborhood has momentum right now? What landlord is even willing to talk to me right now? What is the rent of the space? What is the square footage of these spaces? What is, the patio potential? And all of those questions, yes, they matter. They are not enough, because hospitality is not just about securing a space. Hospitality is about making the space perform for often a minimum of 5, to 10 or more years. That is the part that too many people underestimate. A 2,500 square foot restaurant is not automatically a restaurant. It is a box, even if it is a second generation space, because you still have to make it yours. It becomes a restaurant in this case only when the concept and the seating model and the service model and the kitchen flows and the bar flows and the labor plans and the menu economics and the guest journey and the technology and the storage, utilities, licensing, capital strategy and the leadership model all work together. The lease gives you access to the box. It does not make the box 100% viable. That is why sequence matters so much. Now, before a founder signs a lease, there should be a much clearer understanding of whether the space actually supports the business model that they intend to build. Does the space support the operating model? Can the projected revenue realistically support the rent now and in year 3 and in year 5? Can the kitchen handle the menu? Can the bar support the volume expectations here? Is there enough storage space? Is the loading situation, is that practical? Are the washrooms compliant these days? Is the electrical capacity sufficient? Is there gas lines? Is there ventilation? Is there an existing hood system? And if there is, does it actually work for your intended concept? What is the condition of the HVAC units? What are the latest grease trap requirements in your area? Are there any noise restrictions? Is there zoning? Is it appropriate and is it correct? Is the liquor license, is that path very clear? Are there any patio restrictions even? Is parking going to become a guest or even a delivery driver friction point? Can the business survive a delayed opening? And maybe most importantly, what is the full cost of turning that space into the business that the founder has in their mind, right? Because the lease rate is not the full cost here, of course. The deposit is not the full cost here. The build-out estimate is still not the full cost here. The full cost includes the decisions that were not made, the assumptions that were not validated, the infrastructure that was not inspected, the permit timeline that was underestimated, and the opening capital that keeps getting eaten away before the doors even open. This is what we often see from the consultant side. The founder comes to us after the lease has already been signed. They are excited, but they are also under pressure. They have a rent-free period, maybe 3 to 4 months. They need drawings, but the concept is not fully, developed yet. They need permits, but the layout just keeps on changing. They need pricing strategy and pricing from contractors, but the scope is still unclear. They need a menu, but the kitchen has limitations. They need a bar design, but the service model has not been defined yet. They need, a budget, but the costs are moving faster than the decisions are. And now the lease is no longer a milestone. It is what it is just a countdown. That is what, the energy of a project, that is when that energy, it changes, before the lease, the founder feels in control, right? But after the lease, the project starts controlling the founder. This is not where you want to be because pre-opening is already difficult enough when the sequence is correct. It is much harder when the first major commitment has been made before the model has been stress tested. Now, I want to be very clear about something here. This is not a criticism of real estate brokers. Good brokers are very valuable. A strong, broker can help a founder understand market conditions, identify some opportunities, negotiate key business terms, interpret landlord expectations, and bring structure to the real estate process. They know who owns what. They know what spaces are currently moving. They know which landlords are open to hospitality brands. They know where certain concepts, may fit well. They understand, comparables and tenant mix and deal dynamics and how to get conversations moving. And all of that is important. All of that matters. But a broker is not a full hospitality development team, and they should not be expected to be either. A broker may help you find the space. They may help you negotiate the space. They may help you secure that opportunity that is there, but it is not necessarily their role to validate your operating model, build your startup budget, test your rent to sales ratio. It is not their role to review kitchen flows and define labor structures and build your pre-opening sequences and assess your menu economics, or tell you whether your concept can really carry the financial weight of the lease. That is where founders need to be very careful. A good broker can help you get to the table. A good strategy helps you know whether you should even be sitting down at that table. And those are two very different things. And from the landlord side, there's another layer to this entire conversation. Landlords are not just, handing over keys to their property. They are managing risk. A hospitality tenant can be a powerful addition to a property, 100%. It can bring energy, it can bring traffic and media attention and community connections and strong, tenant mixes. But hospitality is also complex. Restaurants, bars, cafes, and hotels bring operational realities that many other tenants simply do not. There is potential for added noise, though, and odors and waste. There is ventilation and parking and late hours and deliveries happening. There is the grease traps, the alcohol, the patios. There is, construction complexity and public reputation for the property. And of course, there is the high risk of failure attached to this industry. A landlord does not just need a tenant who is excited. They need a tenant who is strategically and operationally prepared. They need to believe the operator can open and operate and pay rent and protect the asset and contribute positively to the property and also the community. That is why a better prepared founder is not just better for the founder. They are better for the landlord as well. When a founder shows up with concept clarity, financial logic, operational understanding, and a realistic budget and a clear timeline and the right advisory team, the conversation right there changes. It becomes less emotional and more, commercial, for lack of a better term. It comes less about hope and more about readiness. That is what serious landlords want, because the best lease is not always the fastest lease. It is the lease, both sides can live with. After the grand opening, energy might start to fade, because opening day is not the test. As we always say, it's month 6 is the test. Month 12 is the test. The first, slow season, that is the test. The first leadership issue, that is the test. The first, cost spikes, those are the test. The first time sales come in lower than projected, that is the test. And if the lease was built on overly optimistic assumptions, that pressure is going to show up very, very quickly. This is where, rent to sales logic becomes important. Now, I am not going to turn this episode into a math class here, but every founder needs to understand that relationship between rent and revenue. If your occupancy cost requires a level of sales the business is unlikely to achieve, you do not have a real estate win here. What you have is a future cash flow problem. The space may be beautiful. Maybe the address is super strong. Maybe the landlord is a reputable one. Maybe the broker, may have done their job. But if the business model cannot support the occupancy cost, the lease becomes a weight. And this is where founders sometimes convince themselves the space will create the revenue. I have heard many comments like, well, it's okay, the area is growing and the market, it's coming, or there is nothing else like this nearby. They're super excited about the new opportunity, or the patio is going to crush it in the summertime, or the landlord says the building has strong traffic, or the neighborhood, needs this. And, I've heard, don't worry, we'll just figure out the rest later. Maybe some of that is true, but those statements are not a model. They are assumptions, and assumptions need to be tested before they become obligations. That is one of the biggest points that I want founders to take away from this episode. Do not confuse market potential with business readiness. A neighborhood can have potential and still be wrong for your model. A space can look perfect and still be operationally flawed. A landlord can offer a reasonable deal for you and the economics can still not work. A broker, it can show you, a strong opportunity and it may still not be the right opportunity for you. That is not being negative here. That is just, having discipline. And hospitality needs more discipline at the leasing stage. So what should founders do? They need to create a lease readiness process. Now, before signing, there should be a clear set of checkpoints. There should be a validated roadmap process to truly understand all of the steps that are required to open. This should include an operational readiness assessment. It should include startup journeys. It should include startup budgets and operational outlooks and an overall summary that leaves, you saying or even thinking, I understand what this will actually take, where the risks are, what decisions matter most, and whether I should move forward or pause or adjust or prepare differently. Now, another layer to this would be ensuring that you are personally ready as well. Opening a hospitality business affects more than just your bank account. It affects your time, your relationships, your confidence, your leadership capacity, your energy, your family, your employees, your investors, and your future. So it's important to understand if you are ready before signing that lease as well. From there, you should follow the sequence that we have outlined on previous episodes in relation to strategic clarity and having the 8 non-negotiable playbooks. You want to answer, more critical questions before signing a lease. Who is it for? When do they come? Why will they choose this brand? What is the average spend? What are the revenue streams here? What is the service style? What are the square footage requirements and the visibility needs for this concept? What is a real budget that is, includes design and engineering and permits and construction and fixtures and furnitures and branding and marketing and professional fees and deposits and training and inventory and pre-opening payrolls and insurance and contingency and working capital. If the budget does not include opening cash, guess what? It is not a complete budget. You also need revenue logic here. How many seats? How many turns are we looking at? What is the average spend? What is the day part mix here? What are the weekly sales targets? What happens in slow season? And then, can that revenue support the rent? Before signing, founders should also understand what the space needs from a design, construction, engineering, and code perspective. A space that appears affordable can very quickly become expensive if the infrastructure here is wrong. These are not small details, and these are, not small questions either. There are literally hundreds of questions that need to be answered. They are often the difference between a workable project and a capital trap. And all of that is before you even get to the lease term clarity here. Founders need to understand the lease beyond the monthly rent, the term length and the renewal options, the personal guarantees and the assignment rights, the exclusivity and the use clauses that are here, default provisions and landlord work, the tenant improvement allowances for the property, operating costs and the signage requirements and the signage rights, repair and maintenance obligations, the insurance requirements for this property. This is where you slow down and get proper legal advice. And what about that cash reserve strategy that I mentioned? We've barely even discussed that yet, right? This is one of the most under-discussed areas in hospitality development. The founder may have enough to, quote, build the business, but do they have enough to open the business? Do they have enough to survive some delays? Do they have enough for the first 90 to 180 days? Do they have enough to absorb a slower ramp up period? Do they have enough to pay themselves or the leadership team? Do they have enough to avoid making desperate decisions in month 3? Again, all of this should be following a strong pre-open sequence. A proper pre-open sequence helps founders see the pressure points before those pressure points become too expensive, like when you are about to sign a lease. Now, for the founders that are listening, I want to give you a few thoughts here before we wrap up. Before you sign a lease, ask yourself, does this space support the operating model, or am I adjusting the model to justify the space? Ask yourself, can the revenue realistically support the rent and the operational costs? Ask yourself, what is the full cost of making this space operational? Ask yourself, what assumptions have not been validated yet? Ask yourself, What happens if permits take longer than expected? Ask yourself what happens if construction, comes in, let's say 20% higher. Ask yourself what happens if opening is delayed by 30, 60, or 90 days. Ask yourself if you understand the personal guarantees here. Ask yourself, have I, had the lease reviewed properly from a legal representative? Ask yourself if you've had the space reviewed by hospitality and design and construction experts before signing. Ask yourself if you have all of the required non-negotiable strategies in place, again, before signing. And here is a big one. Would I still want this lease if I remove the emotional excitement of finally finding a space? That question can save people a lot of money, because sometimes the founder is not choosing the best space. They are choosing relief. Relief that the search is over. Relief that the project just feels real. Relief that they can tell people where, it is going to be. Relief that momentum is happening now. But relief, just like hope, is not a strategy. Momentum without validation can be very dangerous. The goal is not to move slower for the sake of being cautious. The goal is to move in the right order, in the right sequence. That right there is the difference. And at KRG, we often say that pre-opening is not about doing more things. It is about doing the right things in the right sequence. The leasing stage is a perfect example of that. The lease should confirm strategy. It should not replace strategy. It should support the model. It should not force the model. And it should create the right commercial foundation. It should not become the first major compromise. And that is why the lease is not the win. The win is not getting the keys. The win is knowing what to do with the keys. The win is opening with control. The win is protecting the capital for this project. The win is having a business model that can carry the rent and support the team and serve the guest and survive the realities of the first year. The win is not just being open. The win is being open ready. So if you are in the site selection or leasing stage right now, slow the decision down just enough to make it stronger. Bring in the right people. Ask those harder questions. Validate the business model. Understand the real costs here. Respect the entire lease process. Respect the landlord's risk here. Respect the broker's role in the process. But most importantly, respect your own capital and your own future and the business that you are trying to build here. Because once that lease is signed, yes, that dream, it gets an address, but the obligation gets one too. And in hospitality, that distinction is very important. The lease is not the win here. The win is opening with clarity and control and a model that can work now and in the future. Thank you for listening to Hospitality Reinvented. Until next time, stay bold, stay strategic, and let's keep reinventing hospitality together.